What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we've got our Week 5 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup. So make sure to tune in. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. And let us hear it in the comment section. Do you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. But with that being said, let's get right into it. Real quick, before getting into our breakdown, a quick word from our partners at PrizePicks, which is our favorite DFS site of choice this NFL and fantasy football season. If you guys aren't familiar with them, do yourself a favor and check them out. In fact, when you sign up right now and use code ADP, you get a 100% deposit match up to $100. And look, we're already doing all this research for fantasy football matchups. So why not take advantage of it and get some profits as well? PrizePicks, well, they allow you to basically do exactly that. They have so many different player prop bets, not only in terms of single stat DFS, but also in terms of fantasy score. And you can combine them any which way you want. Super simple, super easy to use. All you have to do, choose two more players from the board, and then just pick the over-under on their projected fantasy score or on their single stat. Again, pretty much for every single matchup as the week progresses, those options will be updated even more so. And then the great thing is you've got two different options in terms of how you want to bet it, whether it's a flex play, so that way you can miss one of your selections but still win. Obviously, that's the safer choice. Or if you want more bang for your buck, check out the power play, where if you get all your picks correct, well, you win even bigger. So again, check all of that out. Details in the description. And we kick off week 5 with the Rams at the Seahawks. And this one has the potential for a high scoring affair. I do like the wide receivers here, probably more so for the LA Rams, just because the Seahawks defense not quite as opposing as that of the LA Rams, especially in the secondary. Cooper Kupp is the primary guy here. You know, Robert Woods finally kind of had a decent outing this last week, but nothing really like what we expected. And I think what we said last week is kind of on par. I think we have to view Robert Woods as the number 2 wide receiver on this offense. Cooper Kupp is getting the majority of the targets every single week. And Woods is, probably right now kind of a frustrating, disappointing, low-end wide receiver too, but you continue to play him because of the upside that he presents being on that LA Rams offense. Whereas Cooper Kupp, he's going to be a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 with awesome upside. For Seattle, kind of similar situation. You got Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Lockett showed the first 2 weeks of the season why he is one of the biggest boom or bust guys, just putting up 30-plus points in the blink of an eye. And then these last 2 weeks, well, kind of disappearing. And fantasy managers know what that's like all too well. But at the end of the day, the fact that he can offer you that makes him a guy that you kind of have to start, but more so just realize what his floor and what his ceiling is. His floor is a low-end wide receiver 2, and even that might be optimistic, but his upside is the number 1 fantasy football wide receiver. For DK Metcalf, that's why you probably drafted him higher, because he's going to be more consistent on a week-to-week basis than Tyler Lockett, and that does matter even if he doesn't have quite the same upside. Either way, though, I would put both these guys in a wide receiver 2 type of conversation this week. Last year, a guy like a Jalen Ramsey completely shut down DK Metcalf, so maybe Tyler Lockett reemerges again this week, but I'd prefer the Rams wide receivers. As far as the sits, I do have Jefferson and Deshaun Jackson as sits. If you're very desperate, then maybe you can include Van Jefferson as a start. Seems like he is kind of that number 3 wide receiver on the offense, getting a decent amount of targets, kind of even rivaling Robert Woods as well. Deshaun Jackson maybe previously would be the guy that you'd take a chance on, but I think he's got a much lower floor than Van Jefferson. Yes, he's kind of boom or bust as well, but at this point in time, I'd rather go with Van Jefferson. But right now, I'm still mainly looking at Kupp and Woods. Moving on, though, we've got the Jets at the Falcons. And here I'll start Corey Davis and I'll start Jamison Crowder. Last week I said watch out for Crowder if he comes back. He's got a very good matchup. And if you guys follow me on Twitter, I mentioned starting Crowder in your week 4 games paid off. He had a pretty good performance, and I think he can duplicate that versus the Falcons. In fact, I think you can make the argument that Crowder is the number 1 wide receiver for the Jets when he's healthy. Corey Davis obviously will have a part to play as well, but once both guys are on the field, I would say that they're both kind of mid-level wide receiver 2s, and preferably, you start both of them, but only in positive matchups, which I believe that this is versus the Falcons. That's why I'd feel comfortable starting both of them. For the Falcons, really only one wide receiver you want to start. It's Calvin Ridley. And I would say that's been the case for the majority of the year. Even if Russell Gage plays, he'd be my number 2 wide receiver on this offense. And I will say once Gage returns, then Cordero Patterson will probably see a big-time dip in his targets at wide receiver, which is something to keep an eye out for. But Gage, maybe and potentially if he does return, his first game back from injury, I'd be a little bit hesitant. And then, any other wide receiver options for the Falcons, if Gage doesn't play, I would say are behind Patterson. So I would just look elsewhere. And then for the Jets, Elijah Moore, a rookie, kind of a big name, but missed last week with an injury. This week, even if he comes back, you kind of saw it. Crowder is the more experienced guy. I think he's the more reliable guy. I think Moore becomes an afterthought with Crowder now back healthy. Then we go to the Patriots at the Texans. Not too many guys you want to start here. Jacoby Myers for the Patriots, even though you can make an argument versus this awful Texans team that Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne might have an opportunity, but it's too big of a flyer to take a chance on. If anything, it's going to be Damian Harris, that kind of has a huge bounce back week would be my prediction. Myers just getting all the targets, which makes him very, very valuable in PPR formats. And then Brendan Cooks, despite how awful Davis Mills looks, Cooks, you continue to start him because he's really the only guy that's worth a damn on this offense. Yes, Anthony Miller kind of got some looks as well, but he is nowhere in the same conversation as Brendan Cooks. That's why I've got him as a sit, while Cooks still kind of maintains, low-end wide receiver 2 value. And, hopefully when Tyrod Taylor returns, he's going to be much more reliable. Afterwards, we've got the Lions at the Vikings. Here, I'll start Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen versus this awful Lions defense. That's, pretty safe there, even though I do think Dalvin Cook will have a big-time bounce-back game versus the Lions, and he's going to be a focal point here. But you can't bench Jefferson and Thielen, really any of your top wide receiver options versus this Lions defense. For the Lions offensively, I think we have to see what happens with Tyrell Williams if he comes back from his concussion this week. If he doesn't, then maybe you take a chance on Quintez Cephas, even though I continue to say these Lions wide receivers are way too unpredictable. That's why I'm sitting on Amon-Ra St. Brown and Khalif Raymond. I think that Hawkinson and the running backs are going to just continue to eat up a lot of those targets. These wide receivers are still pretty young. And when Tyrell Williams comes back, I'd probably lean towards probably sitting all of them just because another mouth to feed and the opportunities are going to go down even more so. And for that reason, when that happens, I'm probably going to be passing on all of these guys. Then we go to the Eagles at the Panthers. For the Eagles, I continue to say it, only really one wide receiver option. That is Devonta Smith. He's a rookie wide receiver, so you're going to take some lumps there. You're going to see some peaks and valleys, but he is still, a big upside type of guy that you take a chance on, and he can be a high-end wide receiver too, but his floor can be in the wide receiver 3 range. It really kind of does depend on how the game script goes for the Eagles, but what I can say in certainty is don't really take a look at Rieger or Watkins or any other wide receivers for the Eagles, primarily because it's Devonta Smith and then the tight ends for Philadelphia. For the Panthers, DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson, they were just in a very high-scoring affair versus the Dallas Cowboys, and Robbie Anderson was heavily involved. I'm not sure if that's going to be the same situation versus the Eagles, but DJ Moore is playing like a top 10 wide receiver right now, so you continue to start him no matter what. Robbie Anderson is really the big question mark here, but I think you can kind of see that he's a guy That's ahead of Terrace Marshall on the depth chart. I will say if Christian McCaffrey comes back, I would be fading Robbie Anderson because, he's going to see Christian McCaffrey. That is a lot of those targets, and Robbie Anderson will probably be the first one to kind of suffer due to that. But if McCaffrey sits yet again, I think Anderson is a pretty safe play as kind of a low-end wide receiver too. Afterwards, Saints at Washington. This one is bad as far as fantasy wide receivers are concerned. I'm only looking at Terry McLaurin here. And he's playing really well. I think he can do even better. I think he's kind of limited by Heineke, but at the same time, Heineke only has eyes for McLaurin, so that's nice to see. Unfortunate that the upside, the performance for McLaurin, in my opinion, could be even higher. But either way, he's still like a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2, so you love it. As far as the sits, you sit everyone for the Saints. I just don't have faith in the Saints offense and Jameis Winston. It's too up and down, and these wide receivers really can't do anything for Washington. With Curtis Samuel now back, Adam Humphries is no longer an option in my opinion. I've never been the biggest Curtis Samuel fan, and I continue to say it. I don't think Heineke is the type of quarterback that can sustain multiple fantasy-relevant wide receivers, and since McLaurin is there and the number one guy, I would be sitting Curtis Samuel as well. Following this, we've got the Titans at the Jaguars. A lot of asterisks here for the Titans, specifically A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. Both these guys missed week 4. No concrete information in terms of if they play for week 5. If they do, you start both of them because the Jaguars' defense is absolutely awful. If not, and you want to get a little bit cute here, maybe you take a chance on Josh Reynolds since he was the leading wide receiver in terms of targets. And I do anticipate that the Titans will throw it a bunch here because this could be a very high-scoring affair. Both these defenses are absolutely awful. But if Brown and Julio Jones play, obviously you sit Josh Reynolds. Same for Westbrook and Chester Rogers, who I currently have as sits, because I wouldn't get too cute here with the Jaguars with the Titans wide receivers, that is. For Jacksonville, I'm starting Marvin Jones and Laviska Shenault. DJ Shark obviously on the IR. So Jones is the number one guy unquestionably. Laviska gets a big-time boost as well. And versus this Titans defense, I think both these guys can be high-end wide receiver 2s on the week. Then we go to the Dolphins at the Bucs. I'm starting everyone here, Devontae Parker and Jalen Waddle. The one area where the Bucs defense can kind of be exploited is in the secondary. Now, I will say that is limited here with Jacoby Brissett under center for the Dolphins, but Will Fuller is out. And I think Parker and Waddle are going to get a lot of opportunities here, especially because I don't think that the Dolphins will get anything going on the ground. So Brissett will probably be throwing the football a bunch, which means a lot of opportunities for both Parker and Waddle. I think they could be solid plays in PPR this week, but definitely not in the wide receiver 1 conversation, probably low-end wide receiver 2. For the Bucs, Mike Evans, Godwin, and Antonio Brown, you play all of them. I think Godwin, even though he had a down week, he still has the highest upside in PPR formats. In standard leagues, it's Mike Evans. And then Antonio Brown, maybe the biggest boomer bust guy out of all of these guys, but he has the exact same upside as all of them. So I would play him as well. I think for Evans, Godwin, and AB, when they're all on the field together, you kind of have to treat them as mid-level wide receiver 2s. Then we go to the Packers at the Bengals. You always start Devontae Adams. I don't need to tell you that. Let's move on from that. For the Bengals, Higgins, Boyd, Jamar Chase. Obviously, that's if T. Higgins plays. If not, Boyd and Jamar Chase get a bump up as high-end wide receiver 2s, as has been the case these last few weeks. For the Packers, wouldn't get too cute here. Yes, Randall Cobb had a really nice outing this last week, but I would wait to see if it's sustained before inserting him into your lineups. Yes, I know MVS is on IR, so one of these guys has to step up. But, it's not like MVS was doing all that much. That's why I think what we saw from Cobb can kind of be, a short-term thing, and I'm not ready to put him as a start for this Packers offense on a week-to-week basis. And same situation for Allen Lazard. Moving on, we got the Broncos at the Steelers. I'll start Courtland Sutton here. Still don't really know what to expect with the quarterback situation in Denver. Is it going to be Bridgewater or is it going to be Drew Lock? But what I do know is this is probably going to be one of the lower scoring games of the week, and that has me nervous for the Broncos. Facing a very good Steelers defense, I would only want to take a shot on one of these wide receivers. And if you're making me pick between Sutton and Tim Patrick, I think Sutton is the better guy. But whoever you start for the Broncos, I think is in the wide receiver 2 conversation, and in a low-end wide receiver 2 at that. Wouldn't be shocked if it's wide receiver 3 category. For the Steelers, Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool. If Chase Claypool comes back, that is. If he doesn't, then Juju Smith-Schuster would be a guy. But when all these 3 guys are available, I'm leaning more and more towards Juju Smith-Schuster being a sit. Big Ben looks iffy, and I'm looking at it from a skill perspective, how these guys are utilized. I think Deontay Johnson is the clear number 1 guy, but then Claypool, with his size, him being, kind of more aggressive, red zone threat. For that reason, I would have him as a start ahead of Juju Smith-Schuster. But I would temper expectations for both these wide receivers because they're going up versus a good Broncos defense. Then Bears at the Raiders. Don't really know who the quarterback for the Bears will be. Is it going to be Justin Fields? Is it going to be Andy Dalton? Matt Nagy is keeping everyone on their feet, but regardless, I think this Raiders defense can be beat. It's susceptible, and it won't peak quite to the same degree where we saw versus the Detroit Lions, but Robinson and Mooney are both options. I think we have to view Robinson as a wide receiver too now. We've kind of seen enough proof in the pudding. But I will say the opportunities for the passing attack probably will be a little bit more, especially with Montgomery being out for a while and maybe Damian Williams and coaches not wanting to give him such a full plate. For the Raiders, it continues to only be one name here that I think is the most reliable, even though he doesn't have the highest ceiling compared to Ruggs and Bryan Edwards, who I have as sits. It's Hunter Renfrow, because the name of the game, especially with these, lower end wide receivers on offenses that don't do a great job of having a true number 1 wide receiver, it's consistency. And Renfrow will give you the most consistency compared to Ruggs and Edwards. For that reason, he is our start for the Raiders. Then we go to the Browns at the Chargers. I'll start Odell Beckham. Yes, I know he had a dud of a week, but he was one bad Baker Mayfield pass away from having a long touchdown, and he was getting the targets, which is nice to see. I would go with him here. I'd be sitting Rashard Higgins. I know he saw some decent targets, but Beckham, I don't want to get too crazy with wide receivers on a big-time run-first offense. That's why OBJ, to me, has the highest upside. For the Chargers, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Yes, I know both were kind of disappointing this last week versus the Raiders, but I still believe in them. Mike Williams will be intriguing to see, what happens with him moving forward. Was what we saw the first 3 weeks kind of an aberration or not? But again, Williams, similar to an Odell Beckham, funny enough, was one bad Justin Herbert throw away from having like a 50-yard touchdown. So keep that in mind. But I much more so prefer Keenan Allen and Mike Williams in this matchup. I think both probably high-end wide receiver 2s. Then Giants at the Cowboys. This one's really tough for the Giants. A lot of names that we could throw out here. Notice I don't have Sterling Shepard or Darius Slayton because both dealing with hamstring issues. Now, we don't, again, have a big-time update on either one of those guys. If Shepard plays, I would have him as a start. Wouldn't have Darius Slayton as a start. And if both those guys do play, then Kadarius Toney and John Ross, big-time sits, even more so than they already are. Kenny Golladay, I would start here regardless if Sterling Shepard plays or not. I told you guys last week to start Kenny Golladay. He was going to be the most experienced wide receiver. He would get a lot of opportunities. That's exactly what happened. I think we could see the same situation here yet again. I think in standard formats, he's a high-end wide receiver too. For the Cowboys, Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb, I'm starting both of them. Mid-level wide receiver 2s to high-end wide receiver 2s on the week. Cowboys, high-scoring offense, so you like to see that. And then I know that we saw some promising things from Toney and John Ross, but both these guys kind of new to the Giants, inexperienced. I would be fading them. I wouldn't go chasing the points. Then 49ers at the Cardinals. You got to start Deebo Samuel every single week at this point in time. And Brendan Ayuk, other than one all right week, he's not really getting the targets. And now even more so with Trey Lance being the quarterback, with Jimmy Garoppolo dealing with a calf injury, I don't think there's going to be enough footballs to go around here. Lance, a much more rush forward quarterback. So I think Samuel is going to be really the only fantasy relevant wide receiver for the 49ers, so I'm sitting Brendan Ayuk there. For the Cardinals, DeAndre Hopkins, you start him every single week. He's a wide receiver 1, but it seems like AJ Green has kind of emerged through these first 4 weeks as the number 2 wide receiver on this team. Again, might not have the upside of a Christian Kirk, but has a much higher floor. Same with Rondell Moore. He's getting consistent targets, so I'm starting him here as a low-end wide receiver 2 in a game that should probably be pretty high scoring, and then I'm sitting Moore and Christian Kirk. Then Bills at the Chiefs. This one should be a high-scoring affair. I love the 3 wide receivers for the Bills. I know Cole Beasley had a disappointing outing, but I think all these 3 guys will eat in this high-scoring affair, which honestly could be the highest-scoring game of the week for the Chiefs. Really excited about Tyreek Hill. He's coming off a monster performance. Funny enough, I think he can duplicate it or at least come close to it here versus the Bills, because I think the Chiefs are going to have to score a lot as well. And sure, Josh Gordon was picked up by the Chiefs, and he's probably going to be active for this game. And you could argue he is the number 2 wide receiver for the team immediately, but I'm not going to start Josh Gordon in his first game back after missing a bunch of time. So let's kind of fade that excitement until we see something from him and how he's actually utilized. And then I would also sit Mecole Hardman, really kind of that next name up for the Kansas City Chiefs in terms of wide receivers. Just too inconsistent for me, so I'd stick to Tyreek Hill, which is usually the case with the Chiefs. And then Colts at the Ravens. I'll start Michael Pittman. The touchdown upside might not be there, but he is getting targets like a madman in PPR. That's really, really nice, kind of giving you mid-level wide receiver 2 production. For the Ravens, Marquise Brown, yes, you got to live with the god-awful drops, but he also has high scoring upside, big playability, so you start him. He's a high-end wide receiver 2 with a low floor. And then for the sits, I'm sitting Zach Pascal. I think he's 2 touchdown dependent. And I'm sitting Sammy Watkins because potentially Rashad Bateman could return this week. And if that's the case, I think Sammy Watkins will be the one that's hurt the most. Rashad Bateman is a guy that I really, really like. I still don't have him as a start or a sit because we don't know one way or the other whether he's going to play or not. But once a couple weeks pass and he's potentially activated, I think Rashad Bateman could become the number 1 wide receiver for the Baltimore Ravens. That's how it was trending in the preseason, so something to keep an eye out for. But with that being said, we conclude our Week 5 fantasy football wide receiver starts and sits for every single matchup. As always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have? We will do our best to answer them all. And if you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us there. But in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.